and then we can make a start. So good morning and welcome. Bit weird doing a good morning and welcome when you can't talk back to me, but it's just so that when I come and send you the recorded video, it's easy for me to slice off the beginning, and as you know, I slice off the end so that your images don't appear. So do make use of that chat button. You can chat between yourselves privately, or if you make sure the everyone button is showing what you're saying, we can all see what you're saying. And as things flick up on the side, I will try and make a point of answering your questions verbally, but I will take you off mute, or you can take yourself off mute in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the class, and then I can answer you in real life, but that bit doesn't come out. So I've got a dog next to me. She loves the window cleaner and she's clattering claws, so hopefully she's not going to be too disruptive. So this is the last week of this particular 3-week mini-series. She's very distracting because she's now sitting at the patio doors waiting for cuddles, so she's not going to be getting them. So anyway, on with the show. So this last 3 weeks we started off doing the home side, and as I look out into my garden I can see I've moved my home plaque onto, and good morning Lynette as well, I've moved my home sign onto the patio, and that, if you remember, is when we took out the O of home and made little mini wreaths to put in as the O. And then last week we did the welcome platter, which I use my lazy Susan, and the answer to your question, Joan, is yes. The lazy Susan, which I did as the welcome platter, and I've had it up on my side, but also you could have it flat as well, keeping it as it was originally with the lazy Susan. So that was when I had the sign, I'd written welcome and then made the double-ended swag on there. And I know, Julia, you said you were interested in those little decals there. So do email me if I can help. I know you asked what the price would be, and it times by the number you wanted, it did work out really expensive. But there may be other options of doing all these projects to sort of get your creative juices going, and you may well find a workaround that you can do for less money. But I'm here if you need me. So today's project is we're going to be using a children's chalkboard, because number one, I just happen to have some children's chalkboards to hand. But I quite like the idea, you know, I've been using my Cricut machine to do all my decorative lettering. I thought, well, this time, why don't we actually, you know, write freehand on a board? So it's another option as well to show you don't always have to have, you know, the proper labels to go with things. So I'm going to show you the end product of what I've made, and I'll talk you through how I've done it. And then we'll spend a bit more time on the flower arranging side of things. And I have actually got some fresh flowers, don't fall over, ladies. No silks this week. So I've picked a few bits and pieces out of my garden, and I'm going to be using a jam jar. So a jam jar is very small, so you don't need many flowers at all to fill it out. So I will show you what I've made as my mechanics this week. So there was a bit of lightweight DIY going on, and as ever you can adapt this idea. I mean, if you don't have a chalkboard, you could just make little jam jar flowers, but I thought we'd make it a little bit more special. So this is what I have made. I have converted my chalkboard into a little stand for my flowers, and my flowers fit on like that. So it is a picture. And actually, as I look at that, this calendula has grown. I did this little flower arrangement on Sunday morning, and it was tucked down low. I didn't realise calendulas continue growing once you cut them. So that is what today's project is all about. It's creating a little picture frame, and I'm going to be really careful here because I'm no doubt that water will spill, but that is what it looks like. And if I turn it round, you will see it's actually got the, I'm going to take that off because it's worrying me. It's actually got the hang up on here as well, so I can physically hang it on the wall. And in fact, the video that's going to go into the video playbook at the end of the course, for those of you who've been making your donations, and thank you very much, because I think you all have been making your donations, is now I've lost my train of thought. I did actually hang it on the wall, so I took a picture off our wall and hung it on the wall. So the way I've made that, I've taken the picture frame, and then I have, again, this was just a lucky find. I had a bit of an offcut of wood here, and I thought, well, it's about the right size, and then I have measured just to make sure it is level. So I got my ruler out, because you don't want a shelf that is wonky because your jam jar is going to fall off, and you don't want it whether it's tipping forwards because your jam jar will slide off. Ideally, if anything, if you're going to do a fault, make it so your shelf comes up a little bit further. So what I did first of all was I have painted the edge of my frame, and that's the same way, my new technique for painting. I've got I squirted some acrylic paint into a dish, got my cloth. I'm not doing this for real because it's too messy. And then this is the technique I've shown you before. This was when I did the platter in the farmhouse series of classes. I rubbed the paint on with the cloth, and then with a dry cloth, wiped it off again. So exactly the same technique. You probably can't see it quite so well on the white on the frame, because that was pale wood to start with, but certainly this piece of wood originally was quite dark green, and I've just taken off some of the green. It just looked too obvious and green, and so I layered the paint on, and then with the clean bit of cloth wiped it off. I mean, if you wanted to, you could just paint it on, but I quite like that technique, because the problem with using paint is you've got to clean the paintbrushes afterwards, and with the cloth I just let it soak in a bit of water and squeeze it out afterwards. So it's a bit of a cheat method to do that. And if you don't like the finish you've got, well, you could paint it over the top, or you just add more paint. So first of all, that's what I did just to make it a little bit different. I painted the frames and my piece of wood, and then I got my my drill out. I'm just going to get rid of those bits over there. So this is when the DIY comes in, because you'll need a pencil and a ruler, because you need to make sure that your shelf lines up properly and you've got some decent thick things. So the tools I used, well, I had a bradawl, a Phillips screwdriver. I did actually have an electric drill as well, and I have used 2 1.5-inch screws. So I went 1.5 inch because I wanted them to go in quite a long way to support the weight of the shelf. So I measured up. Then from the back, I drilled, as you can see, I drilled in holes. I then pushed my bradawl through the holes in order that I could mark, imagine this is loose, that I could mark where I wanted my shelf to be. So I then got the little guide hole to make 2 drill holes in the shelf, and then finger screwed the screws in. And when they were just poking out a little bit, I then lined the piece of wood up, and then got my screwdriver in and went like that. So it wasn't difficult to do, but it was one of those things where you do need to measure up, because you want to make sure that number one, you've got the shelf straight and it is sitting where you want it to sit. And I did get my husband to help me, only because he's the king of the power tool, but it was easy enough. I could have done it on my own, but sometimes it takes a different brain to work out the process for what you should be doing, and that's his area of expertise. So I've ended up with this little shelf, and I think it looks quite nice. The only thing you need to think about, though, is because the weight of the flowers, you can see, as I put that down and then put the flowers on top, because this is when we think about balance in flower arrangements. So we think about actual balance and real balance. No, it's the wrong way around. Gosh, I can't remember my principles and elements of floristry. You want the flowers to look balanced, but actually they've got to be actually balanced as well. And this is a case where if your shelf wasn't fixed properly and if your flowers were too heavy, the whole lot's going to tip forwards. So you need to be sure that everything is secure, otherwise you're going to end up with water everywhere. So I've had this propped up against a wall, in which case I did prop it up so it sat backwards a little bit, so it was leaning. But on the wall, because this was really tight, it sat nicely on the wall as well. But if you wanted it to be absolutely secure, you'd need to use Napoleon clips. Do you know what those are? The little brass clips in the shape of a Napoleon's helmet. And I could have put one at the back, or I could put 2 at the sides. And it's the kind of way you see, can you remember those days when we used to go to the pub or out to restaurants, when you see photographs or pictures that are fixed to the wall, Whereas at home we would hook them over like that. These Napoleon clips are like a firm fixing. But the only problem with that is it's firmly fixed and you can't easily remove it. So you just need to bear in mind that whatever method you take, I mean, you can see there I'm hanging it by my finger, it's naturally sloping that way because this bit of wood is making it heavier. So you just need to make sure it is counterbalanced properly. And Julia is saying, I've painted wood with blackboard paint and it comes out, it does come up really well. And I would say, Julia, that the blackboard, it lasts for ages, doesn't it? Because I've got a tin of paint, probably about that tall, about the size of one of the bigger golden syrup cans. And I must have had that for years and years. And it's only now starting to run out. And we've got a huge chalkboard in our kitchen, which I have to do up every now and again. And another thing to do would perhaps, you know, those days when we used to go charity shopping, is to look for a nice picture frame with the hardboard back to it and make sure you paint on the smooth side rather than the slightly rough side, and that's a really good way of making a chalkboard. But I wanted to, yeah, I bought these, I just thought they were about the right size and I wouldn't have to go looking because you can never find the perfect thing at the perfect time. So that is the basic mechanics. And then I thought what I would do is, I need some chalk. So instead of doing your fancy lettering with my Cricut machine, you know, before I've been writing, you know, fresh cut flowers, that you could actually do that by hand, like that. Or you could, once you've got your flowers up here, you could start to say, you know, and being really arty, like that, you know, you could say, you could write out the name of the flower, Daisy, Rose. I've got Sweet William. I've spelt, fortunately, I don't think you can read this close up, but I spelt sweet wrong. And again, it just makes it a bit more homesy. And rather than having something that's permanently fixed on there in terms of lettering, it means you could change it up all the time. So you could make a little gallery of what you found at, you know, what you've got in the garden. It may be if you've got a single jar with just daisies you've picked on a walk, you could make your own little art gallery picture of a little vase here. You know, imagine that with just some garden daisies, you know, weeds from the garden in there, and you've written daisies, and it just sort of makes a feature of it and takes the ordinary into making it extraordinary and just noticing it in the world. Now, these blackboards, they're not a great finish. They're not really, they're quite cheap. And they're quite glossy as well. So you might want to weather your blackboard down. And the way to do that, I've got some chalk here. So just rub the chalk all over and then dust it off with a cloth. And then you get that much nicer, again, you can't really tell there, but you get that, you know, that sort of grey look you get to your chalkboards when you've gone over and over them. So if you don't like the sharp black, you can do that first of all, and it just gets more of a weathered look to it. So that is, oh, it's all dusty now. So that is the mechanics, quite easy to make. It probably took me, the paint drying took minutes because it was such a thin layer. Making that probably took me 15 minutes, not long at all. And it's just about having the right tools to do the right job. And I was lucky the bit of wood was the right size. And, you know, everything was to hand. My husband keeps all his screws in the same place, so it's quite easy to raid what he wanted. So the fun bit comes in, having done your mechanics, is then we get on with the flowers. So I'm just going to move these out of the way. I forgot to say as well, I had a piece of newspaper and I laid that exactly over. I'll do it that way around so you can see. When I did my painting, I laid the piece of newspaper over the black of the chalkboard so that when I painted the edge, I wasn't having to worry about getting it anywhere. So in terms of jam jar, you could just plonk a jam jar on the front, or you could decorate it a little bit. Now I've gone out and I have bought, I say I've gone out, I've been ordering things online and inspired by the modern farmhouse look. So Julia is saying, what depth is your, oh, the plank, the shelf? Oh, well, I've got a ruler here, I could ask that. So my shelf is, the depth of the shelf is about 6 centimetres. So I measured the bottom of my jam jar, and the diameter of the jam jar is about 5 centimetres, and I found a piece of wood that was 6. The other thing I was going to say was that if you had a tiny bit of wood here, you could create a bit of an upstand, and that would hold everything in place if you felt you needed a bit more security. Or lollipop sticks. I think you can get crafting lollipop sticks that are a bit wider, and that might have been a good way, again, just to give you that hint of security, that you could tack that in. But on my husband's advice, he said that pieces of wood I was using were too small, and he said it's going to be too difficult trying to do that. And Julia was saying Clarendon Manor double cream jam jar would be excellent for this. Oh, Dan, you're thinking already. And I've got this jar here, and I don't know what that was from. I think I probably got that in a charity shop. It's like a little mini storage jar that I've had a stopper in. But that was a pesto jar. So again, it's quite a skinny jar. And I've got another one here as well. So I don't quite know what came in them. I'm saying generically jam jars, but I don't think any of them actually had jam in. So it's a skinnier version of a jar. Of course, if you've got a bigger jar, use a bigger jar. But if you use a bigger jar, you're going to have a bigger shelf, and then the shelf will be heavier and the jar will be heavier, plus the water, and the tippage and spillage factor is going to be better. So I would say keeping it all lightweight would be the best. You can get grippy things. And I think it's probably a plumbing thing where you could drill 2 more holes up here and lash your container on at the top, which would be another idea. I just felt that it was sort of another job to do, and every time you wanted to take the jar out, if you were using fresh flowers, you'd have to have undone the fixings up here, and it would just be wear and tear. But if you were using silk flowers, that would be quite good, because you could permanently fix. You could have this sort of collar strapping on here. It's some metal work I've seen as well across the top, or you could use string or something like that, wire, but you could permanently attach it or restrain it a bit more, and that would suit silk flowers really well. But if you're using fresh, you need to be able to take the water off, and clean the jar out and whatever. And I just thought it would be a nice change to use something fresh instead of the silks that we've been using before. And so you could use your plain jam jar, but as I say, I've treated myself to some gingham ribbons. So you remember when we were doing the farmhouse style arrangements, and Sue's just joining us. I think Sue needs to pop off at some point later. She's got an appointment later on today. But this black and white seems to be a real theme of the farmhouse style. And I'm intrigued as well, because whenever I watch videos on YouTube, they talk about this as being buffalo check. And it's another little task for you. I don't know whether you watch loads of videos as well, is to look at those phrases that we speak the same language as the Americans, but we have different names for different items. So I have bought this, black gingham, and I've got a larger check as well. And I thought I might sort of go on to that vibe that is very usable and practical and goes with everything. Normally, if I was going to choose a ribbon, I would go for a green, because the green goes with all kinds of flowers. So I'm sort of going out of my comfort zone with using a black. And again, the easiest way of decorating would be to put little bow ties on all your jam jars. I'm going to guess what length ribbon I use. If I was doing this at home on my own, I wouldn't cut the ribbon until I'd finished making my bow, because you never quite know how much you're going to use. But I can't do that and talk to you at the same time. So I'm going to use that jam jar to set that up a little bit. And simple as simple, to tie an everyday bow, I will do this facing me and then twist it round. So I tie a bow. Oops. Easier said than done. And when you first tie your bow, it looks a bit disheveled, and you could leave it like that because it's just a natural looking thing, or you can fiddle with it a bit more. And again, I'm doing this looking into the camera, so I'm not entirely sure it's going to be balanced, but you can play around with it and pull on the tails to make the bow loops shorter, and really dress it up so it sits the right way. And then when you feel happy with it, I would pull on the tails again and give it a sharp tug. Actually, that made them a bit too big, but that way you can get a ribbon that looks slightly more organized. I want those tails to come down. like that. Probably the loops are a bit too big, but it's just sort of one up from being a normal bow. I've not just left it as it is. I've tried to make sure the loops loop and the tails drape nicely. They're fraying already, so you could do a dovetail cut, or here I've just cut them off at a slant because there's not much there to play with. So that would be a way of simply decorating a jam jar, is to tie a ribbon around it. And you can do that in whatever you've got to hand. So it may be that you've got a ribbon, perhaps you have an odds and ends box. You might want to you know, go any colour you want. You might want to colour theme it, or perhaps you've got lots of ribbons, say for instance in a green, and you might have some jam jars. You know, if you didn't do the chalkboard, you could just have a setting of jam jars, you know, a plain ribbon, a spotty ribbon, a gingham ribbon, and put them together. And different height jars as well would look nice all together as well. But to keep things really sort of natural and sort of naive looking, I'm going to use my garden string again. And as I do that, I notice that my jam jar here, can you see the sticky label hasn't come off properly? So if you do have problems with that, I find white spirit works really well. So I dab a bit of white spirit onto a cloth, onto a piece of kitchen towel. So I've already soaked this label, and my preferred way of doing that is leaving it in the washing up bowl overnight. Sometimes the labels just peel off, and sometimes you have to have a bit of a scratch. I have seen people getting a hairdryer on it and scraping off the hairdryer to melt the glue, but I don't think it's worth getting the hairdryer out for that. I would just rub away, as you know, as if you're taking nail varnish off, and do that. And using my nail as well to scrape a little bit. It's not quite come off, but you don't want to sit there watching me take a sticky label off, but it's much better than it was. And I think that's the quickest way of doing it, but it does smell a bit, and ooh, getting a bit high on the fumes here. So you do need to make sure you do that in a well ventilated room. And if you don't have any ribbon to hand, string is your friend. It's that thing about using a mechanic to do a job. So in this case, the string became my picture hook, but also being able to use things decoratively as well. And if you can get the two things to be both decorative and practical, it works really well as well. So what I'm doing here, I always unravel my string from the inside so it doesn't run away with you like a mystery ball of wool. And I've put washi tape around the edge just to hold it together. So what I do here is I leave myself a tail, and I don't need it, and I wrap around. So tail down there and then wrap around. And you can wrap around as many times as you like to give a decorative collar on the edge. Back to the beginning, leave off another bit of string, and then do the same thing, knot it or tie it in a bow. I don't think I can take the pressure of doing another bow on camera, so I'm just going to do I think I might even be a reef knot there, and then finish off. And you decide how long you want the trails to be. I'm not quite sure you can see that properly. So I'm cutting the tails a little bit shorter, and to finish off, you know, tie a knot in the end, or thread this onto, you know, a button on the end or a bead on the end. I mean, you could get quite creative by having, you know, beaded ties at the bottom. And then it's on to the flowers. So just two really simple ways of either having a plain jam jar or a souped up jar, and being able to reuse things. So nothing is glued down, so I can take off the string and reuse it. I can take off the ribbon and reuse it. And Elsie is saying nail varnish works well, especially the one for gel nails. Well, there's a tip for you. So that's good. I guess it's the same thing, isn't it? Acetone, and if we were scientists, there would probably be a common scientific ingredient to all of that. So as I say, I'm just going to move these things across. So I have been able to go out into the garden to pick things, and because the jam jars aren't very big, you don't need that many flowers in there. So I've got, I don't know, 6 or 8 stems in there probably, plus this magic one that's growing off up and away. So I've been out again this morning and picked a few things, and just try. And I think when you have when you know you haven't got many flowers to use, it really does make you look at what you've got and decide. So instead of being, you know, having all the flowers in the world and packing them in, it does make you actually look at each individual flower and think, actually, you know, I can make something rather pretty out of all this. So I've started off with some lemon balm. So this is scented. I made this into some tea yesterday. And this, but the same rules apply for whether you're making jam jar flowers or making a huge bouquet. You want to make sure that the stems in your jar are what we call the clean stems. They don't have any leaves on them. As soon as you get leaves in the water, they'll start to rot off, and that's what that yucky smell is, and that's what turns your water that sort of disgustingly brown colour. So we start off with clean stems. And also, I don't need my stems very long, but I don't quite know how long to cut them yet. But what I'm going to do is pinch off the leaves, and I'll be left with this sort of tufty bit at the top and this clean stem at the bottom, and that smells absolutely gorgeous. So perhaps I'll have another cup of tea afterwards. And then I've got some calendula, 2 flowers and a stalky bit, so I'm going to cut that off the main stem. Same thing here. I can do that quite easily, but you need to go gently, because not all flowers will let you do this. Sometimes the leaves start to peel off and you're damaging the side shoots. And it may be that if you've got slightly tougher leaves, you'll need to go in with your scissors. So this is a purple perpetual wallflower, and it's got all these little seed heads here, which I'm going to get rid of. And they, oh, it's quite satisfying. They're almost tickling me as they go down. They're doing the same thing. Got 2 of those. And then I've got a Philadelphus mock orange. It's a beautiful scent, really pronounced in the evenings. I'm not entirely sure how well this is going to hold up in a little vase, but I can pinch those leaves up. You always hear them cracking as they come off. Some jasmine, again, I'm not entirely sure that's going to hold up as well. It's so delicate, but we'll have a go. And then lavender. So now is the time that your lavender is just coming out into, it's thinking about coming out into a flower. And if you have got loads of lavender at home, I would say the next couple of weeks, if you want to preserve it, dry it, is the time to pick it. And I would pick it when it was half to 3/4 open rather than fully open, because as it dries, it'll shatter. So you almost need to pick it before it looks like it's coming to flower. And I would say that it'll be a week or so, and I'll be starting to pick this. Again, we don't have loads of lavender in our garden, so we like to leave it for the insects to enjoy. But I will need to take off those straggly bits there. And then sweet pea. So I've tried to keep my colour palette. I've not gone clashing colours. I have sort of thought about it. You could go clashing if you wanted to, but I was trying to sort of go for soothing colours that sort of all went together. And Joan is saying that I know my plant names. I've struggled. It's really, you know, when you know something, but it's getting your brain to tell your mouth that you know what a name is. So, oh gosh, we have not got so much time left. I am going to, I'll just show you how to do this, and then we'll take you off mute. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to make a proper tied bunch. I'm going to make it in my hand. And I may shuffle things around a bit, but I'm using my hand as a vase and pushing the materials in. So for instance, the little bits of lavender, I'm going to put them in as one go, and they're just sort of shuffling off to one side. And where I've got 2 flowers, I need to decide whether to put them together or to separate them. What I wanted to show you was the trick for how to tie them. So I'll put these together just casually. It's only a jam jar. I'm slightly concerned that that leaf might be too big. So just something that looks vaguely pretty in my hand. I'm not going to tie them with string though. What I am going to do is cut them off to make them slightly manageable. I'm using an elastic band, and this is quite a handy trick. So I'm taking the elastic band and I'm sliding it up the stem with 1 flower. Can you see that? And then I'm wrapping the elastic band all the way around. This one's going around twice, stretching it out and looping it over another stem. And that holds everything in place without you fiddling round with a piece of string. It doesn't look pretty. I've used quite a wide elastic band. And then what you need to do is to measure how long to cut your flowers. So I like my flowers to have their necks right up into the vase. So I need to cut those a little bit shorter. You don't want to go too short. If you go really short, you'll find if your stems are only this long, that all the heaviness of your little bunch is in the top, and you may find that the flowers topple out of your vase. So that would be the end arrangement, like that. And then I could have it like that. I could put the flower names up. I could be changing that every day, but just like a little visual record of what to do. I'm going to take you off mute, and I can see that Elsie has said, did I say sweet? It's a sweet William, not a sweet pea. Sorry about that. So I don't know who's going to get there first, whether I can unmute you, and then we will change the view. Oops, I don't know whether I'm unmuting you or this isn't working. So if I got Joan and, oops. I don't know whether Julia, oh, Swayze, you're here as well. I didn't see you.